An Approach to Misophonia by Shaylin Hayes-Raymond. Hi, I'm Shaylin Hayes-Raymond, and I'm a counseling therapist in New Brunswick, Canada. I've been an advocate for misophonia since 2015. I run Misophonia International, which I started with Jennifer Brout in 2015. Dr. Brout is no longer working on Misophonia International, but her work was very important for creating the project, and I thank her immensely. I am now the director of the nonprofit, the International Misophonia Foundation, and I'm a web and graphic designer. I publish fiction and nonfiction, and I'm an avid blogger. Misophonia is very important to me because I have the disorder myself, and it's been really hard to live with, but I have learned to adapt, and eventually that became the Misophonia Matters approach. If you prefer print books, you can find them here. For the workbook, which is the taller one, it is on Amazon, and this includes all the worksheets as well as several copies of the worksheets. The main Misophonia Matters book can be found in print on Amazon or through Barnes & Noble. You will be given PDF copies of the book with this class. This also includes a Word document that can be written on directly for the workbook. What this class includes. This class includes 5 parts. Part 1 is psychoeducation, Part 2 is advocacy and explaining, and Part 3 is accommodations and negotiations. Part 4 is sensory-based strategies, and finally, Part 5 is cognitive and psychological strategies. These are not in any particular order, however they are for the book, obviously, but each piece can be used on its own or over and over again. Part 1. Psychoeducation. So, what is misophonia? As you can see on this slide, there are several citations, and misophonia is a neurophysiological disorder where otherwise non-aversive stimuli cause a fight, flight, freeze reaction. Now, the research and understanding is, of course, relatively new, with the first mention of misophonia being in 2001 by Drs. Yastreboff and Yastreboff, 2 audiologists in their clinic. Now, we have shown that there is a brain basis and sensory motory basis by Kumar. Schroeder found that the auditory cortex and salience network are involved. The amygdala has been shown to be involved in misophonia as well. So what this means in layman terms is that people with misophonia are suffering from a condition that is not psychological. These triggers for misophonia are in the physical processing of the brain. So what is sensory processing disorder? Sensory processing disorder is something that I talk about a lot because there are a lot of similarities with misophonia. At this time, neither are classified as a disorder, but sensory integration dysfunction was first found in the 1960s by Dr. Jane Ayres. And in the 1980s, scholars proposed that there was more defensiveness in sensory channels, and they mentioned, more senses. In the early 2000s, Lucy Miller changed the disorder to sensory processing disorder, but sensory integration disorder and sensory integration are still used by some. The difference with sensory processing disorder and sensory integration is that Lucy Miller split the disorder into multiple categories such as sensory modulation disorder, sensory discrimination, and sensory-based motor disorder. And the subcategory of SMD of sensory overresponsivity is what we most commonly know as misophonia, where people have an otherwise averse reaction to sensory stimuli, including sounds, visual, touch, etc. Now, whether or not these are the same disorder is something that research and time are going to need to suss out. But as it stands right now, people with both sensory processing disorder and misophonia are overstimulated by sounds. So what is the Misophonia Matters approach? The Misophonia Matters approach is an approach that I developed, and it puts advocacy at the forefront of misophonia. It's designed to be flexible and put advocacy at the center stage. The belief here is that no amount of cognitive behavioral therapy or even sensory processing skills will change the fact that somebody gets a fight, flight, freeze reaction to a trigger. So, negotiations and world navigations are necessary for improving your quality of life. This doesn't mean that coping skills aren't used with it. It just means that a more integrated approach requires all of these things. So this is the Misophonia Matters course of action, and I'd lay this out both for lay people and clinicians. And to start, the use of an assessment tool for misophonia, such as the Duke Misophonia Questionnaire, is suggested. If you are doing this on your own, you do not have to use the questionnaire, but I do suggest it because it's a useful way to see if there is change at the end of the program. B is psychoeducation resources and education for either the family or the individual. And the psychoeducation must include an explanation of the expected change and inform sufferers that they should not expect 100% mitigation of symptoms. I feel very strongly about this, and any practitioner that is telling you that they have a cure for misophonia, whether that be CBT, hypnotherapy, etc., is being dishonest, because there is no current cure for the disorder, and I think it's unfair and really cruel to say there is. So part C is goal taking with the client or yourself to check in and see how you feel after this learning. And in the next steps, there are possible pathways, and they can come in any particular order. And that's your advocacy and explanations, accommodations and negotiations, sensory-based skills, and cognitive and psychological skills, which make up this book. And as I say, they can come in any order, and you can use them over and over, thus the workbook, including multiple sheets. The next step is to measure and see if there is a change, such as reusing the same questionnaire from the beginning. And if a clinician is doing this, there should be a follow-up to see what the perspective of the family was on this intervention. You should really make sure that you're actually doing what the client needs if you are a therapist. And for yourself, it can even be good to follow up to see how you felt about this process and really reflect if there was any change. So here is an example use of the Misophonia Matters approach. This example includes if it were used in psychotherapy as a treatment. However, you could also do this for yourself and use it as a guideline. For session 1 is the initial appointment with psychoeducation mixed with learning about the client. Obviously, if you're doing this yourself, you probably don't need to learn about yourself. Session 2 is the misophonia assessment, followed by debriefing and seeing the client's perspective on the assessment. Session 3 is more psychoeducation and presenting materials. This step could take several sessions or as few as one, depending on the prior knowledge. Session 4 is discussing misophonia with the client and figuring out what their main concerns involve. It's useful to share the potential Misophonia Matters pathways and see which they choose. Session 5 is engaging in the chosen activities with the client. Room should be left for an open discussion on the path and how the client feels about this chosen activity. Session 6. Repeat pathways until all chosen pathways have been followed. Debrief after each step. Session 7. Misophonia assessment and debriefing on the therapy process. This might be later in sessions, depending on the specific